So this month it's going to be a little less formal. I'm just sitting at my desk at my edit bay, and I'm just going to kind of ramble. And when I'm not working, I've been thinking a lot about visual effects and the direction of visual effects, and reminded me of some of the plans that I had for the Book of Lies project. As I'm sure at least some of you know, I made a proof of concept short film for a feature that I've written called Book of Lies, and it's a sequel to The Danger Element. My intention was to use the short as a pitching tool, which it still is. That's the plan. It just takes very long for these things to happen, and sometimes they never happen. There were certain things that I had already started planning for the feature, things that I thought maybe I could experiment with and do test shots for, and they were special effects shots. And I thought a lot of them were going to be miniatures, because I'm sort of averse to the idea of a special effect looking fake. Of course, you've seen the effects that were done in The Danger Element. The Tesla coil at the beginning of the movie, that was all hand painted by me, frame by frame. I did it in Photoshop, so it is technically a digital effect, but I did it by hand. It's all hand animated. And then later on in the film, when you see the same Tesla coil, I had learned how to do the same effect in After Effects, which still took quite a bit of hand animation and trickery to make it work. Now, some of the people that watched the Book of Lies short might think that there are 3D digital effects, such as this shot right here. Now, I'm sure that some of the people that watch this, maybe a 3D effect or something like that. But in fact, it was a photographic plate that I shot of an actual church in Los Angeles called St. Vincent de Paul. And then I also shot some additional plates of the interior of a small cave. Cassandra Meter, our art director, put together this shot in Photoshop, and then I brought it into After Effects, and I added little effects here and there, such as there's some dust moving around in the foreground. See those birds back there? There are no 3D elements in that shot. There's another instance a little bit later in this proof of concept film that I'm sure that some people thought was 3D digital effect. And that would be this scene right here, with Dr. Elmis's beating heart in a jar. But in reality, this shot was accomplished with a jar that I found at an antique store, and a rubber heart that Evil Ted was able to procure for me, the little hose that comes out the top that he was blowing into to make the heart beat. In the background is actually a miniature set that Ted built for a pitch for one of his movies many years ago. And then it's sitting on top of a little trash can stand that we found at IKEA. And yeah, Ted built a foam thing to go around this glass jar. It was basically just like a beverage dispenser. And he built this foam frame to go around it. So everything you see in the shot is real in the sense that it really did exist, whether it was a miniature like in the background or a full-blown model in the foreground. You see some little bubbles go through the shot in the jar. Those little bubbles are just image files that I matted into the shot. Now, there was a whole sequence at the end of the proof of concept short film that I hoped to be able to make, for the short film, but I wasn't able to. And I believed that I was going to be able to make them work with miniatures. And as time went on, it proved to be very, very much impossible, because the miniatures would have to be very large. So after I released, the proof of concept, I decided that maybe I would try to map out some of these scenes using 3D software. I started learning to do some 3D animation, very rudimentary 3D animation, around 23 years ago. And I used a little bit of it on the Sock Baby series. This little energy ball right here that I used to kill one of the Greys. And the way that I did it was I made a couple of glass balls, one inside the other. And I made the material texture of these spheres to be like a very rough, transparent glass. Then I put a couple of colored lights inside of it that sort of rotated around inside of here. Put the whole thing in front of a black background, and then I just kind of luminance matted the whole thing out. So it looked like that. Extremely early attempt by me of computer graphics. Now, we can't forget, of course, earlier in the same episode of Sock Baby, we have computer-generated characters, which were done by Edward Schofield, who was a video game artist at the time. I got to witness that. We shot the plates for this, but he did all of the animation, all the character design, all the rigging. And to me, it was mystifying. I had no idea how it was done, but I definitely did begin to see the potential of it. Now we'll look at a later example of some of my own personal forays into 3D effects. This was a sequence that I did for a show that Justin and I were making for a network called My Damn Channel, and the show's called Go Sukashi. Some of you might remember it. And the whole idea was this vacuum cleaner reminded us of a Tron light cycle. The moment he touches it, he is transported into his imagined interpretation of the grid. Now, I modeled all of this very primitively in Bryce 7. All of the shapes are very primitive shapes. And if you look at the trail, the light trail behind the bikes, that was actually part of the bike. It was sort of a semi-transparent part that I attached to the bike that extended, extremely far, so that I could, and I had to put like a boolean in here to cut the round space out of the trail, so it didn't cut into the wheel here. It was all very primitive shapes. It's meant to replicate sort of the shape of the vacuum cleaner a little bit. All this was done in Bryce 7. One thing I remember is that I couldn't get the bikes to actually do these right turns like you see here. And what I had to do is actually put two of the same bike in and have one go out away from the camera in this direction, and then another coming in from the right that would intersect it at just the right moment to make it look like it did that turn, like you saw in the original Tron movie. And I remember it was all on a laptop. It was sitting in the living room where Justin and Cody and I were living. And I would just come in and check on it every day for a week and a half, just watching these really simple shots slowly rendering. Now that you've seen a little bit of my humble history with 3D computer-generated images, I wanted to show you some of what I did with Book of Lies. My original intention was just to use 3D software, not to actually do the shots, but just to plan them out. I found out that Unreal Engine was free to download. You don't have to pay anything to them unless you make a project that earns a profit of over $1 million, and I don't think I need to worry about that anytime soon. So I downloaded Unreal Engine. I spent a few days trying to learn some very basic things, and this was the very first test that I did in Unreal Engine, where I placed these pieces of this chapel and I flew a camera through it, and I was very impressed with the result. Even looking at it now, you can see little things like the motion blur on the camera. So the first big shot that I wanted to try setting up was right after the last shot in the Book of Lies short, where you see Jitney come up to this rope and he pulls it and you hear a bell ring and it cuts to black. What I really wanted was to have Jitney pull this rope and it releases this enormous clapper somewhere far above him and it rings this enormous bell. And like I said, I had this idea that I wanted to do this all with miniatures, but I decided to use Unreal Engine to sort of lay out the shot, like what would I like it to look like. I was, again, surprised at what Unreal Engine is capable of. I started to think, if I did this with a miniature, or even if I had a set that was this size in real life, I don't think I could make the shot look any better than this. What you're seeing here is actually the window in the program, similar to the shot you just saw, except you can see there's little assets in here. There's a light. This little thing here determines these little dust particles that are floating around in the scene. You see, there's one. They're very subtle, and it gives you this atmosphere. And this is all real-time rendered, as you can see. I'm moving the camera. This is one of the things I love about this is I do work in animation professionally, but I don't necessarily like my live-action films to push into the realm of being partially animated films. And I realize that it's arguable that I am doing that by using effects like this. But what I like about it is mostly what I'm capturing is simulation. So if I move to a different view, you can see my camera. There's a camera here, and there's the view of the camera. The camera is set up just like a real camera. We have a micro 4/3 lens mount, just like my real camera that I'm filming myself with right now. I can set up the focal length and the f-stops and everything, just like a real camera. I'm going to go into a more of a simple view here so you can see how I built this. Turn off the lighting. These are just the simple assets. If I zoom out, you can see it's very simple. And you want to keep it simple because my computer is not a render farm at Pixar. So there's not a lot going on here. It's just a set like you would build for a real movie. If you were building a set for a big movie, you wouldn't want to build things that you weren't going to see on camera. You'd want to plan all that very carefully so you didn't waste money. And it's the same here too. At least that's what I've learned. You want to save computing power. The bell, this little thing, the bell here at the bottom, that was an asset that I bought very cheaply. And then I built the rest of this. And the idea behind it is that it actually sits in this framework physically, right? So when I simulate physics, this whole thing kind of sits in here and makes it so that it won't fall down, and it also has the capability of swinging back and forth. You can see this if I hit the simulate button. You can see how all these things kind of fall in place. And it's the same with this thing too. The clapper thing is another part that I made that is made to physically sit in this space, and it all rotates on this cylindrical object here. It obviously doesn't look like it's connected because it doesn't really need to be physically connected. These objects just have to be sort of grouped together and locked together in their animation, so that when I hit the simulate button, gravity takes care of the rest. And this is what I like. It never quite falls the same way twice. It means that sometimes I have to do multiple takes. Sometimes it messes up. Sometimes the bell gets stuck. But to me, it gives a very natural event that you can then film. And it's not so much that you're animating it. See, here it got stuck. See, it's unpredictable. And this is what I like about it. Things can sort of go wrong. But yes, I can do it as many times as I want, film it as many times as I want. And the only thing I'm really animating is the movement of the camera, which is kind of like having a motion controlled camera on set. The next shot in the sequence I wanted to test out was this underground sort of armory of vehicles and weapons and tools that Jitney had in this underground monastery. And I wanted to have this sort of big wide shot of it that comes down, and then you see the paraclete being uncovered as if it's being pulled from mothballs and pushed back into service. So now here's the same scene inside of the program. And so here's the camera move. And towards the end of it, it pushes out of focus a little bit. Once again, you can see the only thing that I've really animated here is the movement of the camera. So it's kind of like if you just had it on a crane. If we back up and look at the whole scene, you can see that it's a lot simpler than what it looks like in camera. And this is the trick of all filmmaking, whether it's live action or not. You need to think about what's going to be on camera. For instance, these things back here, these are watchtowers from a castle that I just pilfered these from and used to kit bash in here. But in the shot, you don't see the tops of them. They just look like large, brick pillars. That's the idea. It's just anything that's outside the shot, it doesn't really matter. It's an ongoing project. I keep adding clutter to it. I keep adding things to it. Some of these desks over here are actually from the Matrix set. These are Neo's desks from his apartment. A lot of these tools are from the same thing. And then lots of just hodgepodge stuff. Some military vehicle back here, pickup truck. And this right here, I found this fairly simple P-51 Mustang model. And as you can see, the model itself is very simple. It doesn't look very good, honestly. But it's all about, just like in real life, just imagine if you were filming this live action and you had a replica of a life-size P-51 Mustang and it was made out of plywood, and it just didn't look very good under regular lighting. So what would you do? You might just hide a little bit of how bad it looks. and that's really the whole trick. It's the trick of filmmaking in the first place. I'm obviously still learning, but you get the idea. Now, you can see when the camera comes down in the shot that I showed you, the paraclete is here, and you see the cover pulled off of it, but it's not here. The reason for that is that element of the shot is actually the real car that I filmed down in my garage. The focus pull on the camera is actually focusing on this little thing here. And that is just a sort of a road indicator that I have buried in the floor. And so the camera is racking focus to that invisibly. And I'm tracking a real shot of the real car that I filmed down in my garage to this little object here so that it matches with the movement of everything in the shot. The next thing in the sequence I really wanted to try is to actually show the paraclete being lifted up out of the depths of this underground monastery. And I actually did build a physical miniature of this and attempted a lot of different ways of filming it. But ultimately it was just too small. I didn't have enough space. I lived in a one-room studio apartment, and what you see is about as much space as I could spare, and it just wasn't working. So I tried once again to model the shot in Unreal Engine. The first thing I had to do, though, was create a model of my car. And I did that by purchasing a model of a 1935 Auburn Speedster, which was not perfect. It was not exactly like my car, but it was extremely close. And then I had to go in and re-skin it and recolor it and redo the material so that it looked like at least the color of my car. So then I used that model to produce a series of tests of this shop that I wanted to do. Not all of them measure up. Some of them get pretty close. I think the main thing I'm trying to get across is, first of all, I'm far from being an expert in 3D animation. I'm very interested in filming real events and seeing them happen in front of a camera. But it's very expensive to do, and therefore I rarely get to do it. And this has given me an avenue to practice filmmaking, even handling cameras, as it simulates a camera very well without having to leave my office and without having to spend any money. And I think that is an extremely valuable tool for a filmmaker, especially one like me who only dreams up things that are just outside of his reach to pull off in live action. It's exciting to see that there are things like this that can sort of simulate the experience of making a live action film, and maybe even replace some of the experience of making a live action film. But anyway, thanks for listening to me ramble about this, and I hope to see you next time.